The email arrived at 5:42 p.m. Simple line of text that ended 12 years of marriage. Do not worry about the loan repayment. I have fallen for someone else. As the words sank into the glow of her computer screen, Claire's world tilted in silence. The coffee beside her went cold, the rain outside turned into a mirror. She had no way of knowing that this betrayal would shatter more than her heart. It would test the limits of love, resilience, and a mother's quiet strength. Rain pressed its fingers against the glass like 1,000 small knocks, a soft percussion that filled the quiet accounting office after hours. The building's lights had gone to half power, the exit signs glowed a dull red, and the screen in front of Claire Bennett glowed a cold, unwavering blue. She was about to shut the laptop and go home when a new email slid into the corner of the screen with the calm confidence of a verdict. Subject: about the van. The message opened on its own as if it had been waiting. Do not worry about the loan repayment. I will handle things my way. Ethan. Her hand hovered over the trackpad. The cursor trembled. She did not breathe. Another ping. A second message stacked beneath the first, brief and merciless. I have fallen for someone else. I am starting over. Claire did not move at first. She studied the letters as though they might be a cipher that would, in time, translate into something reasonable. The office hummed with electricity and the faint vibration of the air conditioner. Behind her, the copy machine blinked a small green eye. The rain intensified, turned sheet-like, turned absolute. She reached for her phone and called him. The line connected. She heard road noise. She heard a wiper blade sweep and knock. She heard a distant radio voice, cheerful and tinny, as if it belonged to someone else's life. Ethan, she said, but her name for him came out as air, light and stunned. Where are you? A pause. Then the voice she knew better than any other, except it was smooth, emptied of weight, a stone skimming across a lake. I told you, he said. It is over. I am done with this life. I am starting over. With whom? Her voice surprised her. It was very calm. It was not the voice of someone falling. That does not matter, he said. You'll be fine, Claire. You always are. She rose without realizing that she had stood. The chair rolled back and touched the cabinet with a soft click. Rain pulsed against the windows in a steady rhythm. Somewhere down the corridor a door closed and footsteps retreated, then disappeared. She was alone with the sound of weather and the call that refused to hold still. You took the van, she said. You wrote that you would handle the loan. In my name. Silence stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. Then Ethan laughed once, quietly, like someone noticing a coincidence. You signed it, he said. You always wanted that van. Consider this clean. Consider this freedom. He ended the call. The rain offered no opinion. Claire looked at the phone in her hand, at the black square of it, heavy and innocent. She called again. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. On the fourth attempt, she listened to the recorded greeting and tried to understand how an ordinary voice could be so perfectly wrong. The cursor still waited on the laptop, a small arrow pointing nowhere. Her inbox sat open like a mouth. The two emails from Ethan shone at the top, bright as a wound. Below them, the ordinary life continued to send its tidy bulletins, a receipt, a reminder, a calendar invite for next Tuesday's audit review. She closed the laptop and the screen collapsed into her reflection for a moment. A woman of 35 with rain-dark hair and a face that could not decide whether to be pale or flushed. She sat down again because standing asked too much of her legs. She folded her hands to stop them from shaking. The mind did what minds do when confronted with something it cannot accept. It bought time. It unspooled a memory. A dining table in a small house in Silver Ridge. The laughter of a boy. Luke with a loop of spaghetti sauce above his lip like a small painter's signature. Ethan telling a story about a road that turned into a river of light at sunset. We should see that, he had said. All three of us. In a van that smells like pine and coffee. He had reached for Claire's wrist and pressed his thumb to the thin blue vein there, as if he could feel the future moving beneath it. The memory slid and became another. Daylight at the dealership, cheerful beyond reason. Paperwork stacked like small white mountains. A salesperson with sun freckles and an unshakable smile. Ethan leaning against the desk, arms crossed, casual, attentive, letting Claire do the signing because his credit was not as strong. "We are a team," he had said. "You do numbers. I do the map." When the final page was complete, the salesperson shook their hands and said, "Congratulations," as if those syllables could never betray anyone. The present rushed back like a wave that had only pretended to retreat. Claire stood again and closed the cabinet. She placed her laptop in her bag and put the bag on her shoulder. She turned off the lamp on her desk and the room cooled by 1 degree. She was careful with each small action because there were no large ones she could trust herself to make. The exit sign breathed its red light above the door. She walked toward it. In the elevator, she studied the floor numbers as if they were a code. The doors opened with a whisper. The lobbies smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and wet coats. Outside, the parking lot lamps burned inside their fogged glass, small moons each with its own orbit. The rain was not a curtain now. It was an element, a full room she would have to walk through. She stepped into it and the world erased and drew itself again. Under the awning, she tried Ethan again. Voicemail. His voice, recorded months ago when they had been unremarkably married, said her name like a promise. She ended the call before the tone. She dialed the bank instead, but hung up before a person could answer because she did not know what to ask, or how to ask, or who she would be on the other end of the question. Across the lot, a delivery truck slid by, slow and careful. Water fanned from its tires like silver grass. Claire walked to her car and the rain climbed her coat, then settled into it. She opened the door and sat. The interior smelled like fabric and old coffee. She did not start the engine. The keys waited in her hand without impatience. She looked down and saw that the phone still glowed with the email. She opened it again because the mind does not believe a fire can exist without warmth. There it was, without heat, without smoke. "I have fallen for someone else." She read it aloud, quietly, and the words lost none of their shape. She opened the first message again. "Do not worry about the loan repayment. I will handle things my way." She tried to imagine what my way meant in a world where language had rules. Her thumb slid across the screen and the mailbox scrolled into older days. She stopped when she saw it. A message from a week ago. It was the one she had loved receiving, the one she had forwarded to herself twice so that it would not vanish into the flood. "Loan approved, $35,000. Congratulations." The rain tapped the roof above her with a more insistent rhythm. The subject line glowed on the glass like an inscription. She tilted the phone and the words reflected into the window, into the night, into the rain, so that it looked as though the sky itself had been approved for something it would never be able to pay back. Her breathing found a slow, deliberate pattern. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Again, again. She remembered the sensation of a pen in her hand at the dealership, the glide of it across a signature line, the way Ethan had watched her sign with admiration that now felt like a photograph of someone who had never existed. The keys in her palm recorded her pulse, a metronome that refused to speed up. She closed her eyes and saw Luke's face when the van had been a dream. He had pointed at a map and traced a line from Silver Ridge to the coast, then north. "We can park by the ocean," he had said. "We can drink hot chocolate at sunrise." That promise had floated through the house all week, bright as a balloon, until now when she could not see it at all. Claire opened her eyes. The subject line still hovered in the reflected dark. "Loan approved." Approved for what, she thought, and almost said it aloud. Approved for the distance between before and after. Approved for the cost of another person's decision. Approved for the education of a woman who had believed in a future she had signed for in good faith. She lifted the phone and called Ethan one last time. She let it ring to the end, and then she listened to the space after the tone, the clean, official silence that accepts messages without judgment. She did not speak. She ended the call. Then she did the only thing that felt possible. She scrolled back to the approval email and stared at it until the words blurred and clarified, as if the message itself were breathing. Outside the windshield, the parking lot lights smeared into long pale bands. Cars came and went, and their taillights moved like bright fish. The rain softened, then gathered itself again. Claire reached into the glove compartment and found a small packet of tissues that had been there for years, waiting for a minor catastrophe. She opened it and pressed one to her face and felt the cool paper drink what it could. When she was ready, she started the engine. The dashboard warmed to life, a soft constellation. She checked the mirrors and signaled and guided the car into the rain. The wipers swept and knocked. The world sharpened by increments. She could see the road and the shape of the turn at the lot's exit. She could see the traffic light ahead, the patient red, the promise of green. The phone lay in the cup holder, face up. The screen had gone dark, but it still held the last thing she had looked at. She knew this because she could feel the light of it without seeing it. She could feel the weight of a sentence that would not be undone. She drove toward home, and the rain's music changed as the speed changed, and the town of Silver Ridge, with its cafes and its small theater and its narrow river, carried on regardless. At the next stop, she lifted the phone and the screen woke. The subject line returned, unwavering. Loan approved, $35,000. She did not cry. She did not curse. She did not make a list of what to do next. She only looked at the reflection of the words in the wet window and understood, in a clear and quiet way, that nothing about the future would be simple, and that simplicity was no longer the point. The light turned green. She drove. The rain drew lines across the glass, thin and continuous, like writing she could almost read. The house greeted Claire with a silence that sounded deliberate, as if someone had lowered a lid over the place and pressed down. She set her keys in the ceramic dish by the door. The sound was too loud. It jumped into the empty rooms and came back thinner, a small echo without company. The lamp in the hallway clicked on with its usual soft delay. The light did not warm anything. She moved through the rooms with measured steps. The kitchen held the remains of a life that had paused at an ordinary hour. A cereal bowl waited upside down on a drying rack. A note from the school nurse lay magnet to the refrigerator, polite and forgettable. When she opened the pantry, the scent of cinnamon and dry pasta rose like the smell of a neighbor's house. She closed the door again and pressed her forehead to the cool wood. The office was at the back of the house, a narrow room with 2 deep filing cabinets and a window that showed a square of the small yard. She reached for the top drawer, the one that had been theirs together, the one that held the packets from the mediator and the letters that had seemed like a bluff when they were first exchanged during a winter of ordinary arguments. She pulled the drawer open. It rode out on its rails with a reluctant hiss, then offered her nothing. Not a folder, not a paperclip, not a single form with its tidy boxes waiting to be filled. The drawer was as bare as a new plate. She tried the second drawer. Empty. She crouched and pulled the bottom drawers. Empty. She sat on the floor because the floor was honest. She breathed because breath is what a body does when it cannot do anything else. She pictured Ethan's hands lifting the folders and guiding them into a bag. She pictured the quiet way the cabinet had given up its weight without protest. A small sound escaped her, something between a laugh and a sob. The world had been rearranged while she was at work and had told her nothing until now. She stood, and the house tilted a fraction before it steadied. She opened the laptop on the desk and let it wake. She signed into the bank because there was nothing else left to confirm. The page loaded with the calm of a weather forecast. The numbers appeared. Balance, $33.90. She read it once, then again, the way a person tests a locked door even after hearing the click. A week earlier, the account had been a quiet reservoir, a landscape of careful years. Now it was a glass with a last sip in it. She clicked into the activity. The withdrawals had a rhythm, precise and spaced, as if someone had been tracing a metronome. 1 large, 3 medium, a final small one that looked like a test to see if the bucket was empty. The timestamps were from that morning. Her hand went to her throat and found nothing to hold. She shut the laptop and stood so quickly the chair rolled back without her. She took her bag and keys, and the car moved under her like a decision she did not remember making. The streetlights of Silver Ridge were just coming on, their globes a little soft in the rain. The bank downtown kept late hours on Thursdays. She drove there with the steady attention of someone crossing ice. Inside, the air had the faint, clean taste of filtered water. A young teller with careful hair introduced herself. Claire gave her card and her name, because those details still belonged to her. She asked to speak to someone about withdrawals that did not make sense. The teller listened and nodded, then led her to a small office where a manager sat behind a screen that glowed slightly green. He had a pen he did not use. He had a patient voice. He asked her to log in on his terminal so he could view the account with her. They looked at the same numbers, which did not change their story just because two people were looking. The manager asked if she recognized the ATM locations. Claire knew the branch on Orchard Street. She had deposited checks there on Saturdays. She did not recognize the convenience store off the highway or the gas station outside the county line. The manager asked if she had given the card to anyone. She said that her husband had had a duplicate card because they had been married for 12 years. The manager did not formally react. He asked if he could pull the camera footage from that morning. She said yes. He stepped into the back for several minutes and then returned with another employee who carried a tablet. The footage was clear enough to summarize a life without speaking. At 9:18 a.m., a man who was Claire's husband walked up to the ATM on Orchard Street, shielded the keypad with his body, and completed a withdrawal. At 10:02 a.m., the same man withdrew cash from a machine that dispensed bills as though embarrassed to be seen doing so. At 11:37 a.m., he did it again in a place that did not belong to any of Claire's errands. At 12:50 p.m., he made one final transaction in the company of a woman who waited 3 steps away, looking at her phone with the intent concentration of someone trying to be invisible. The manager paused the video. He did not offer the expected apology because apologies cannot be issued for facts. He said that the bank could begin a fraud claim, but that duplicate cardholder activity inside a marriage introduced complications. He said that the police could be notified if she chose, and that the bank would honor any valid request that followed a report. He spoke in a tone that had learned to live beside other people's emergencies. He offered Claire a glass of water. She did not take it. "Thank you," she said, because she still had that word. "I will file a report." She left the office, stepped into the bright perimeter of the lobby, and walked out into the evening as if the air might have been reset. The rain had softened to a mist that gave the street a delicate sheen. In the parking lot, the cars were arranged in obedient rows, each inside its painted boundary, each belonging to someone who believed it would still be there when they returned. She reached her car and the strength left her in a sudden, practiced way, as if the body had been holding a pose and a bell had rung to end the exercise. She sat down hard on the seat and the door stayed open because closing it asked for a coordination she could not find. She put her head in her hands without meaning to. The world darkened at the edges, then moved away from the center, and then the center itself went quiet. Voices arrived in pieces. A man asking if she was all right. A woman saying to call an ambulance. The rain came back into focus as individual points on her sleeve. Someone asked her name and she said it, and then the world moved again, and the ceiling of the ambulance replaced the sky. The siren's voice was urgent but not unkind. She counted the ceiling panels and listened to a paramedic ask about pain and dizziness and stress. When she answered, it felt like reporting from a distant shore. The hospital lights were a colder color than the bank's, as if they had been chosen for their honesty. Intake swallowed her name and her date of birth and the story that had earned her a bed. A nurse put a cuff around her arm and the machine printed numbers without adjectives. A doctor asked questions in a careful voice that had been threaded through years of other people's nights. The word exhaustion appeared with the steadiness of a diagnosis that had had practice. The phrase observation overnight followed it. Claire signed a form while a nurse studied the clipboard. The pen felt heavier than the one at the dealership. When she woke, a soft morning had replaced the rain. She did not know how long she had been asleep. She only knew that the room was white, and the sheets were white, and the ceiling tiles were white with a gray grid that looked like a patient map. A sound, close and small, drew her attention. It was the sound of someone trying very hard to be quiet. Luke sat in the plastic chair by the window, feet not touching the floor, hands folded in his lap with ceremonial care. His face was solemn in a way that made him look both younger and older. When he saw that her eyes were open, he stood at once and placed his hand over hers, Not squeezing, only covering, as if to keep the hand from floating away. "Mom," he said, and used the second syllable as a landing. "What happened? Is it serious? Are you going to die?" His questions were not punctuated, because fear does not wait for punctuation. Claire watched his mouth form the words and felt the room come back into a human scale. "Of course not," she said, and to her own surprise a smile found its way onto her face. It was small and steady. "I would not leave my son alone in this world." His shoulders dropped the slightest amount. He took a breath that sounded like a door opening. "They called me from school," he said. "They said you were here. I thought I would come before visiting hours in case visiting hours were a rule and not a suggestion." "You did the right thing," she said. "You always do." He looked at the monitor beside her bed, at the line that rose and fell with her heart's patient metronome. He nodded as if in conversation with the machine. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Are we going to be all right?" he asked. "With money. With the van. With him." She thought of the bank manager's tablet and the shape of Ethan at the ATM and the woman 3 steps away pretending not to exist. She thought of the balance she had seen on the screen. She allowed herself one full breath in which to remember the weight of those facts. Then she let the breath go. "Not yet," she said, and the words were a promise to the truth rather than to despair. "But we will be. I still owe the world one comeback." He smiled with his eyes more than his mouth. He sat again and did not let go of her hand. Outside the window, the rain had returned in a fine veil, drawing the day into a single pale column. Water traced paths down the glass with a discipline that looked like intention. The hospital room took on the gentle sound of a distant train. Claire turned her head toward the window. The water marked the pain in patient lines, like writing she knew she would learn to read. She felt the ache in her muscles and the clean tiredness that comes after a storm inside the body. She felt the warmth of Luke's hand over hers. The void was still there, large and unarguable, but it had edges now. The light reached the bed, climbed the blanket, and rested on her shoulder. She watched the rain draw and redraw its quiet script on the glass and allowed herself, for the first time since the email, to imagine that emptiness could be a beginning when the right person stood beside it and waited. The rain had thinned to a pale mist by the time Claire came home from the hospital, the kind of weather that turns a town to pearl and quiets even the most restless streets. The house in Silver Ridge greeted her with the scent of laundry soap and the faint mineral trace of tap water. She paused on the threshold as if the rooms might have changed their positions while she was away. Everything remained where it had been. The silence, however, had a new contour, as if someone had drawn a chalk line around what was missing. On the entry table lay a small stack of mail clipped by a black bulldog clip. The clip felt heavier than it should. Claire set her bag down and separated the envelopes with careful fingers. There was a flyer for a hardware sale, a postcard for a dental office that had changed its name, a school newsletter with a photograph of Luke's class standing on risers like a choir of tiny historians. At the bottom was a white envelope with a narrow window. She did not need to read the return address to know the sender. The paper had the soft give of expensive stationery. She opened it with the flat of her thumb and unfolded a letter that had perfected the art of sounding reasonable. Notice of late payment. Amount due upon receipt. Please contact us to avoid penalties or additional actions. Claire read each sentence slowly, as if the speed of her reading could change the pace of consequence. The page did not alter its tone. It offered no outrage on her behalf. It only did what paper is designed to do. It announced. The front door clicked shut behind her. She turned to see Luke in the hallway, a careful figure in a gray sweatshirt, as if he had wished to blend with the house until he knew whether she was steady. He did not rush her. He did not ask questions that required more than a breath. "Welcome home, Mom," he said, and came forward. He stood within her reach and let her choose the distance. She reached for him, and he stepped into her arms, light and solid, the exact weight of the years she had carried and would carry. He released her first, because he had always known when to let air back into a room. "I made tea," he said. "It is not very good, but it is hot." "It will be perfect," she said, and found that the word perfect could still be used without breaking. They went to the kitchen. Steam curled from 2 mugs and united with the thin fog at the window. The table had been cleared and wiped with care. On it waited Luke's laptop, closed and centered, like a stage that had been set for a single precise scene. Sitting beside the laptop was the white envelope from the lender, spread open like a quiet verdict. Luke watched her read it again, not to remind her, but to show her that he understood how long it took a truth to finish arriving. When she folded the letter, he touched the edge of the laptop with 2 fingers, a gesture that looked like respect. "Mom," he said, and his voice had the soft authority of someone who has practiced speaking gently to a fragile thing. "I think I can help." She studied his face. There was no bright, reckless confidence there. There was only attention. She placed the letter down and nodded once. "Tell me." He opened the laptop. The screen bloomed to life and showed a desktop that had the simplicity of a room without clutter. He clicked on a small blue icon shaped like a compass needle. The application opened to a map of the county with a pale green overlay. In the top corner, a family name appeared, the familiar Bennett that had been ordinary yesterday and now felt like a word that required caution. "Family tracker," Luke said. "You remember. He installed it when we went camping last summer after I wandered off the trail. You both wanted a way to check on me if it happened again." Her first instinct wore the uniform of fear. "Luke," she said, "this feels like the beginning of a mistake." "That is stalking." "It is our van," he said quietly. "Not him." He looked at the map with an expression that had more patience than hunger. "This is not about where he is. It is about where the vehicle is. We can show the lender. We can show the police. We can take a step that is not blind." She closed her eyes for a moment and felt the deep ache that follows a storm within the body. When she opened them, the map waited without pressure. She drew the chair closer and "Saturday, show me." He typed their shared credentials, relics of a simpler season. The screen adjusted, then settled. A small icon shaped like a van glowed a steady blue. It pulsed once, then again, as if breathing. "Silver Ridge National Park," Luke said. He tapped the label. The map zoomed. Trails unfurled like careful scribbles. The van's icon rested near a campground loop whose name she knew from brochures and conversations about weekends that had not arrived. The signal updated 15 minutes ago. Claire looked at the blue dot until it resolved into something more than an idea. It became metal and vinyl and a set of keys that had once fit easily in her palm. For a heartbeat, she felt the old lift in the chest that belongs to a plan. Then the memory of the bank and the footage and the empty drawers moved through her, and the lift transformed into a pinched steadiness. She placed her hand flat on the table to make sure she was not mistaking conviction for anger. "If we go there without a plan," she said, "we will not be people. We will be weather." Luke nodded, as if he had expected her to say exactly that. "Then we make a plan. We do it slow." She looked at him. The boy she had hushed with lullabies now proposed a pace. His face had the softness of 10 years and the intent of someone older, but it did not overreach. It did not pretend to know the whole way across. "Guide me," she said, because asking him to advise her did not reverse their roles. It only acknowledged his vantage point. "I think we document first," he said. "Screenshots. Timestamps. Locations. Then we call the lender. We show them that the vehicle is on public land. We tell them we will cooperate to secure their property. After that, we go to the police. We do not ask for an arrest. We ask for advice about how to recover an asset safely. We do not use words that are not ours to use." "You mean words like theft," she said. He held her gaze. "We can say what happened. We can say what we saw. We can say what we signed. We can let them name the crime if there is one." A breath entered her and did not catch on anything on its way out. "Yes," she said. "Yes." He turned the laptop so she could press the keys herself. She took the screenshots, careful to include the date and the small pulsing blue. She saved each image to a folder titled with the day's date. She wrote a brief note under each, a sentence as clean as a ledger. "Van located at Silver Ridge National Park, Site Loop C, 5:22 p.m. Signal refreshed at 5:37 p.m. As she typed, her hands steadied. This was the language she knew. This was the grammar of facts. They printed the letter from the lender and clipped it to the folder. Luke fetched the portable printer from the hall closet with the pride of a child who can carry something valuable without stumbling. The printer hummed and breathed warm paper. Claire laid each sheet in order. She had not known how much she needed the sound of pages stacking into a small, coherent weight. Outside the window, the mist brightened with the last light of the day. The house returned to its 6 p.m. rhythm, neighbors closing car doors, a dog barking once and then reconsidering, the river a few blocks away sending a low and constant hush through the streets. Claire stood and stretched the tightness out of her shoulders. She felt as if a lattice had been lowered into the emptiness inside her, not to fill it, but to give it edges. "Mom," Luke said, and she heard the almost imperceptible tremor in his voice. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," she said. She did not dress the word. But fear is not a reason to lie still. It is a reason to move carefully. He nodded. "We should call the lender before they close." She dialed the number on the letter. The recorded voice was smooth and capable, a corridor of options. She pressed the numbers that led to a representative. When a woman answered, Claire introduced herself with her calmest voice. She explained that the vehicle was in her name, that the payments would be delayed, that she had located the van on public land, that she wished to cooperate to protect their interest and her own safety. She did not mention Ethan by name. She did not speculate. She asked what steps would allow a lawful recovery. The representative listened. She placed Claire on hold twice to consult a supervisor. When she returned, her tone had changed a few degrees toward respect. She explained that the lender could not send a tow without proper authorization, but that a police escort was advisable if Claire chose to reclaim the vehicle herself. She asked Claire to email the screenshots and the loan documents. Claire wrote down the address with a pen that did not tremble. She thanked the woman. She ended the call and forwarded the documents. "What did she say?" Luke asked. "She said we must not improvise," Claire answered. "She said we must be visible and safe and lawful." "Then we go to the police," he said. They drove to the station as the evening settled into its steadier darkness. Inside, the lobby was clean and unspectacular, as if designed to assure people that chaos could be measured. A sergeant at the desk listened to Claire's summary with professional patience. He asked for the printouts. He examined the screenshots and the loan papers. He asked the name of the park and the loop. He asked whether she believed a confrontation was likely. "I do not want a confrontation," she said. "I want a recovery." He considered this, then nodded. "Good words," he said. "We can place a note on the patrol log for that area. If you choose to drive out there tomorrow in the daylight, I will ask a ranger to meet you at the trailhead. We will not intervene unless a crime is in progress, but we will be in sight." "Thank you," Claire said. The words landed with the weight of something earned. Back home, she and Luke placed the folder by the door with the car keys on top of it. They moved through their small nighttime rituals with a reverence that surprised them both. Dishes into the rack. Shoes by the mat. Lights dimmed but not extinguished. Claire stood at the window for a moment and watched the street acquire its night reflection, one lamp at a time. The mist had lifted. The stars were a cautious handful. Luke hovered in the doorway, a boy who wanted to say good night and also wanted to anchor the room. "Mom," he whispered. "We can find him, but only if you want to." She turned from the glass and saw the shape of him held within the doorway like a word underlined. She crossed the room and rested her hands lightly on his shoulders. "We will not chase him," she said. "We will find the van. We will do it the right way." The sentence settled in the air between them, plain and exact. Luke nodded, then went down the hallway toward his room with the quiet steps of someone who has agreed to meet the morning where it will be. Claire remained by the window for a little while longer. The park's name rose in her mind like a landmark on a dark map. Silver Ridge National Park. The words had always sounded like a promise. Tonight they sounded like a test. She could feel the pulse of the blue icon even with her eyes closed, steady and insistent, as if a small heart inside a machine were keeping time for them both. Morning arrived as a clean blade of light across the kitchen table, dividing the paper folder into two neat halves. Claire stood at the counter and measured her breath the way she measured columns, with care and with purpose. The tea kettle murmured before it sang. Luke appeared in the doorway with his hair still damp from the shower, a small towel around his neck like a banner set aside after a ceremony. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Today we make a plan that can stand up." They ate in the quiet economy of people who know what the day will ask of them. Toast, tea, a sliced apple that held its crescent shapes like moons arranged in order. When they finished, they packed the folder. Contracts. The letter from the lender. Screenshots printed with timestamps clean and black. Claire added a list she had written at sunrise, each line a simple verb: call, file, copy, confirm. The police station sat on the corner where the town tilted toward the river. Its brick face had the kindly severity of a schoolhouse that had decided to be practical. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and hand sanitizer. A bulletin board held polite posters about bicycle safety and weather alerts. Behind the glass, a desk sergeant looked up from a clipboard and saw two people who had arrived with their minds fixed. "Good morning," Claire said. "I need to file a report regarding a vehicle that is in my name and currently out of my possession. I also have information about its location." The sergeant pushed a form through the slot with a pen clipped to it. "We will need a statement and evidence of ownership," he said. "Write clearly. Attach copies. If you have documentation of the location, include that as well." "We do," Claire said. She was careful with the word "we." It did not mean a child would speak for her. It meant that she was not alone. They sat at a small table to the right of the lobby where a plastic plant did its best to look patient. Luke arranged the papers like a quiet choreography. Claire wrote her statement in a hand that had balanced ledgers for 12 years. She wrote only what she could prove. She recorded dates. She described the van by make, model, color, and number. She attached the loan contract and the dealer's receipt. She added the lender's late notice. She printed the GPS images and circled the pulsing blue with a pen that made a careful halo. When she finished, she looked up and said, "I will not accuse him of a crime I cannot name. I will ask for help to recover what is in my name." Luke watched her with the attention of someone writing his own manual in the air. "You look stronger, Mom," he said. "Maybe because I finally stopped crying," she answered. The words were not bitter. They were a description of weather that had passed. The sergeant returned and raised the glass panel. "You can come back," he said. "The detective on duty will take the paperwork and ask a few questions." They followed him into a corridor that seemed longer than the building should allow. At the end, an office opened like a page. A woman in a dark blue shirt and a simple chain around her neck stood and offered a small, sincere smile. A nameplate said Detective Harper. Her eyes were attentive without being sharp. She gestured to the chairs in front of her desk, then took the folder as a librarian takes a book that has been needed. "Tell me what you can tell me," she said. Claire spoke as she had written, calm, sequential, precise. Detective Harper listened without interrupting. When questions came, they were clean and necessary. Did Claire have sole ownership? Yes. Did she have reason to believe the vehicle had been moved without her consent? Yes. Did she have access to a GPS application that indicated the current location? Yes, and here were the screenshots. Had there been any threats, any messages that suggested harm? No, only indifference dressed as certainty. Detective Harper placed each document on the desk in a tidy grid. She studied the GPS images, traced the campground loop with a capped pen, and nodded once, as if affirming a calculation. "We do not retrieve property without proper authorization," she said, "but we can assist with a safe recovery if you choose to present proof of ownership on site. We can also notify the park rangers that there may be a civil dispute that could require a neutral presence." "I am not seeking confrontation," Claire said. "I am seeking recovery." "Good," Harper said. "Please sign your statement. We will log the report and place an alert with patrol. If your information is accurate, the vehicle is on public land. That reduces certain risks. It also means we can be visible. Visibility helps." Luke leaned forward. "We will not go at night," he said. "We will go in daylight. We will be where other people can see us." Harper looked at him with a small adjustment in her expression, a quiet recognition of a child who had stood in the doorway of adulthood and then stepped back by choice. "Exactly," she said. "Let me make a call to the park office. If a ranger can meet you, I will arrange it. If not, I can request a patrol car to pass the trailhead at the hour you plan to arrive. She excused herself. In the brief privacy, Claire closed her eyes. The room held a pause that did not require apology. Luke watched the door and kept his foot still with a discipline that could have belonged to a much older person. Harper returned with a small notebook in hand. "Ranger Alvarez can meet you tomorrow at 11, she said. "He will not intervene unless necessary. He will verify identification and keep the peace. If the situation changes, he will call for support. Bring your documents. Leave any expectations of a scene at home. The law is slower than emotion. Let it be slow." "Thank you," Claire said. The words did not feel small. They felt exact. They left the station with copies of the report and a card with a direct number. The sky had cleared into a pale blue that looked as if it had been washed and hung to dry. They crossed the street to a print and ship store. Inside, the air smelled faintly of toner and cardboard. The clerk did not ask questions. Claire and Luke created 2 binders, one for documents, one for images. Tabs divided the story into sections: ownership, payments, communications, location. There was a quiet dignity in the way the hole punch made its agreeable clack. There was relief in the way the rings closed without complaint. At home, they staged a small command center on the dining table. The laptop sat open to an email draft addressed to the lender. The subject line read, "Update on location and recovery plan." Claire attached scans of the report and the schedule with Ranger Alvarez. She wrote in sentences that would cause no alarms and admit no vagueness. "We will present identification and proof of ownership. We will seek peaceful handover if possible. Please advise if further documentation is required." Luke moved around the room, gathering quiet proof. He found the dealership key tag at the back of a kitchen drawer, the one they had kept as a tiny souvenir. He located the second set of keys, the one that had not left the house. He scrolled the GPS application and noted that the blue icon refreshed at intervals of 10 minutes, then 20, then 10 again. He recorded these times on a sheet titled Signal Behavior. He did not act as a commander. He acted as a recorder. A witness with small hands and a clear mind. "Water," he said, setting a glass by her elbow. "Break." She drank and felt the ache in her chest soften enough to let breath move freely. She looked at him and saw the boy and the historian, the child and the patient scribe, living in the same narrow shoulders. "You look stronger, Mom," he said again, as if strength were a light whose dimmer he could sense. "Maybe because I finally stopped crying," she repeated, and this time there was a trace of warmth in the sentence, a faint gold thread. They rehearsed what she would say if Ethan appeared. She would identify herself, state ownership, request the keys, and present the report. She would not name him a thief. She would not argue about the marriage in public soil. If he refused, she would step back until Ranger Alvarez arrived. She would let the day hold its shape. As the afternoon leaned toward evening, the phone lay on the table like a bell that had not learned how to ring. When it did, the sound startled them both. The screen showed an unfamiliar number with the town's area code. Claire answered with a simple hello that contained no speculation. A measured voice came through, neutral and exact. "Mrs. Bennett. This is Detective Harper. I wanted to let you know that a patrol car passed through Silver Ridge National Park 30 minutes ago. They observed a vehicle matching your description near Loop C. We will need you to come in tomorrow morning at 9 to confirm a few details and to collect a copy of the patrol note for the ranger. Bring your identification and the binder you prepared. You are doing this the right way." "Thank you," Claire said. The words felt like a hand on a railing. After the call, the house held its breath for a beat and then exhaled. Claire looked at Luke. A smile lifted the corner of her mouth without consulting the rest of her face. It was a hesitant architecture that still chose to stand. He returned it, small and luminous. "Tomorrow," he said. She nodded. She closed the binder and smoothed her palm over its cover as if calming a restless horse. In the window, the late sun drew a golden sash across the neighbor's fence. The river sent a steady hush through the street. Somewhere, a train offered its one long vowel to the evening. Claire turned off the kitchen light and the room deepened to a quiet blue. She gathered the keys, the binder, the statement copy, and placed them in a neat stack by the door. She tested the deadbolt once, then again, not out of fear, but to send a message to the house that it would be guarded until they returned. In the darkening hallway, she rested her hand against the wall and felt the cool paint under her fingers, a small proof that the world still held. She spoke to herself in a voice low enough to respect the hour, but firm enough to carry. Tomorrow, I will face what is left of my past. She did not add courage to the sentence. She did not need to. The words themselves made room for it. The house received them. The evening kept them. The night drew a clean breath, and the plan took its shape inside it. The road to Silver Ridge National Park climbed in calm switchbacks, pine to the left, granite to the right, sunlight folding itself into the shadows and unfolding again. Claire drove without hurry. The binder lay on the passenger seat with the steadiness of a witness who would not change stories under pressure. Luke sat in the back, quiet and alert, his hands folded over a small notebook as if he were keeping a small flame from the wind. At the trailhead, the morning had already arranged itself. The brown park sign with its careful letters, the map posted under glass, the gravel lot with a few cars choosing their borders. A white Ranger truck waited beneath a cedar. A patrol car idled near the far edge, light bar dark, presence visible. The day had the bright clarity of truth that intends to be seen. Ranger Alvarez stepped from the truck and met them with a nod that was both formal and human. He was a tall man with a sun-lined face and a posture that suggested patience had weight. Detective Harper was not there, but her voice lived in the structure of the morning. Arrive in daylight, be visible, bring your documents, let the law be slow. Mrs. Bennett, Alvarez said, I am here to observe and to keep the peace. I will not intervene unless safety requires it or a crime occurs in my presence. Is that understood? It is, Claire said. Thank you for meeting us. Luke stood slightly behind her left shoulder, a small orbit that honored her gravity. The patrol officer raised a hand in greeting from the car and returned to his radio. No one hurried. No one pretended the day was smaller than it was. Alvarez led them down the loop road on foot, the gravel giving under their steps with a sound like a measured breath. The air smelled of resin and damp stone. Campsites revealed themselves one by one, each with its picnic table and ring of rocks and the soft evidence of other people's weekends. Birds rehearsed a morning phrase in the branches and then grew quiet, as if to listen. They saw it at the same time, a white camper van with a familiar dent near the rear bumper where a bicycle once had leaned too hard. It stood in the shade, solid and indifferent, as if it had been born here and had never known any other earth. Near it stood a man and a woman. The man's stance was a guarded approximation of casual. The woman leaned against the table with an angle that chose defiance over balance. Claire felt her pulse step forward and then back, like a person at a threshold trying to see both rooms at once. The van's profile struck her like a line she had written in another hand. She placed her palm against the binder's cover until the pressure steadied her. Mrs. Bennett, Alvarez said quietly, you will present your paperwork. Speak in simple statements. I am here. She nodded. They stepped into the campsite's open circle. Gravel shifted. Pine needles drew small commas on the ground. The woman looked up first. Madison Cole had a plain, symmetrical face that would have been unremarkable except for the deliberate challenge in her stare. Ethan turned. The image of him that had lived inside Claire's mind all night and all morning slid away, and the actual man stood in its place. He looked like someone who had not slept well but had decided to pretend otherwise. Claire, he said, and set her name down as if it might stay where he placed it. She did not answer the name. She addressed the day. This vehicle is in my name, she said. I am here to reclaim it. I have brought identification, proof of ownership, and a copy of the report filed yesterday. Madison laughed, not loudly, but with a pronounced curve. You came all this way for a van, she said. You could have sent a message. Ethan kept his eyes on Claire. We were leaving soon, he said. There was no need for a scene. There is no scene, Claire said. There is a recovery. She opened the binder. The tabs made their small, correct sounds. She laid out the contract, the dealer's receipt, the loan documents, the late notice, the patrol note. The ranger studied each page with the attention of someone who has believed in evidence longer than he has believed in argument. He compared the name on the contract to the name on Claire's license. He nodded once, the declarative nod of paper that aligns. Mrs. Bennett is the legal owner, Alvarez said. The vehicle is subject to a civil dispute. Until that is resolved, it will be impounded for safekeeping. Madison pushed off the picnic table. Impounded, she said. Over what? This is ridiculous. Ethan's jaw shifted. We can talk about this, he said to Claire. You do not have to escalate. We can make an arrangement. Claire placed her hand over the late notice, as if to keep it from being blown away. You drained my account, Ethan. He lifted his chin with a practiced weariness. I just borrowed what was ours. No, she said. You borrowed my name. You borrowed my credit. You borrowed my peace. The sentence landed with a clean sound, not loud, not theatrical, a hammer lifted only high enough to strike true. A bird resumed its morning call and then stopped again. Madison folded her arms. You signed for the loan, she said. That is not on us. Do not punish him because you believed a salesperson. Claire did not look at her. She looked at Ethan as if privacy were still a viable courtesy. A camera recorded you at 3 machines, she said. You were not alone. You withdrew the week's savings, and then you withdrew the future's savings. He looked at the ground and found nothing there. I will fix it, he said. I always said I would. You always said, she answered. Today requires something else. Alvarez spoke to the patrol officer over his shoulder. The officer made a call. The idle of a tow truck murmured far away, then grew louder as if the forest itself had summoned it. Madison's mouth set in a new line. Ethan stepped back and looked at the van with the expression of someone discovering that an object can appear to be many things at once: shelter, plan, evidence, proof. The patrol officer approached with a clipboard. For the record, he said, Mrs. Bennett has presented proof of ownership. The vehicle will be removed to the impound lot until a civil hearing. Keys, please. Ethan reached into his pocket and produced a ring with slow reluctance. He stared at the metal for a beat that tried to be significant. Luke did not shift. He did not speak. He kept his focus on the ranger's boots, on the small scuff by the eyelet, on something human and ordinary because the moment above it had too much voltage. Madison did not surrender any gesture. You think this is a victory, she said to Claire. It is a van. He left because you were impossible to love. A silence opened, and its shape was a square without adornment. Claire felt the old reflex wake, the one that wants to defend and persuade and disprove. She watched it rise. She watched it pass. She let it go without comment, as if it were a bird that had flown into the wrong room and now had found the open window. A park aide in a green cap jogged up from the loop entrance with an envelope in his hand. He gave it to Alvarez. From the station, he said. Printed from an email flagged for Mrs. Bennett, care of Detective Harper. Alvarez opened the envelope and scanned a single page. He read again, and his face softened by a degree that meant nothing and everything. He handed the sheet to Claire. The paper was the ordinary white of offices everywhere. The letterhead was from Silver Ridge Logistics, the company where Ethan had been employed before he left. To whom it may concern, the letter began. This is to document an internal inquiry regarding irregular communications between Ethan Bennett and a former contractor, Madison Cole, during the period surrounding a personal loan application. While we do not allege criminal activity absent a court's finding, we attach copies of messages in which Ms. Cole encourages Mr. Bennett to shift debt instruments into his spouse's name and to misstate intended use of funds. This may be relevant to any civil proceedings. Attached were timestamped screenshots. A line from Madison: if it is under Claire's credit, you get the van quickly. We sell later. Cash is clean. Another: do not mention travel. Say work. Lenders like purpose. Claire read each sentence as if it were a knot tied in another rope that had tugged at her life. Madison's face did not change. Her eyes sharpened, then flattened, then chose contempt again. People write things, she said. People plan things. It does not make them crimes. Alvarez did not answer her directly. This letter will be included with the report, he said. Questions about intent and misrepresentation are for a civil court. Today is about possession and safety. Ethan took the paper from Claire's hand. He read the lines, and in the space between his eyebrows a brief flicker appeared, as if a small interior light had been switched on in a room that had been kept deliberately dim. He turned to Madison. "You said it would be simple," he said. "You said she would never do anything but absorb." Madison lifted one shoulder. "You needed a life," she said. "I offered a path. If you cannot walk it, that is not my fault." The tow truck arrived, its amber lights rotating in slow, responsible arcs. The driver stepped down and consulted the patrol officer. Paperwork passed between hands, pens clicked, the small bureaucracy of consequence. The driver backed the truck into position with care. Chains rattled with the impartial sound of metal ready to serve anyone who asked. "Mrs. Bennett," Alvarez said gently, "please step back while we secure the vehicle." She stepped to the edge of the campsite circle. Luke moved with her, no faster, no slower, the small orbit holding. Ethan stood in the space between the van and the picnic table like a question that had lost its punctuation. Madison sat on the bench and composed her posture as if for a photograph that would be admired by someone who had not been present. The winch began. The van rolled its inches with a reluctant dignity, then yielded to the physics of the slope and the pull. The chains took the weight. The bed tilted. The vehicle climbed, not aloud, not in drama, but with the quiet authority of a decision that has been made correctly. Claire watched without blinking. She followed the ascent with her eyes as if reading a sentence to its period. When it was done, the driver set the brake and secured the straps. The patrol officer signed a form and handed a carbon copy to Claire. "The lot opens at 8, he said. "You can view the vehicle whenever you wish, but it will remain there until a judge orders otherwise." Madison rose. "This is petty," she said. "You will miss him when the noise stops." Claire looked at her for the first time as if she were a stranger offering an opinion on weather that would never pass through this valley. She did not reply. Ethan stepped closer, not so near that the ranger would object, close enough for the old habit to test its impulse. His voice tried for calm and found gravel. "You are really going to do this," he said. "You already did it first," she answered. She turned away before the words could echo and lose their shape. As she moved, she saw herself briefly in the van's side mirror, a woman in a plain coat, a face returned to its own temperature, a posture without apology. The patrol car's light bar caught a shaft of sun and threw red and blue across the glass, a soft pulse that passed over her cheek and went on to the trees. The colors did not assign hero or villain. They marked a boundary, clear and visible, between what had been taken and what would be reclaimed. 3 months later, Silver Ridge had exchanged its wet spring for a clean summer light. The river ran narrower and quicker, the cottonwoods trembled in their pale uniforms, and the sidewalks carried the daily weight of ordinary errands. Claire rose before the heat, brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen, and set out the small schedule that she now trusted: part-time hours at the firm across town, an afternoon appointment with her therapist on Wednesdays, a notebook where she counted progress by lines instead of miles. There were losses that did not ask permission before they entered a room. Some mornings she woke with a pulse that accelerated without cause, as if fear had learned to walk the house in the dark. On those mornings she sat by the window until the sky delivered a thin band of mercy along the horizon. She practiced the sentences her therapist had given her: "I am safe. I am here. This feeling will crest and pass." She did not always believe the words when she began them, but they were always true by the end. The impound lot opened at 8. On the first Monday of June, she signed the forms beneath a shade structure that smelled of oil and sun. The van stood where chains and fences could not be misunderstood. It looked smaller than it had in the forest, almost modest, a machine that had learned how to wait. A buyer from a business in the next county inspected it with a flashlight, named a number on a folded paper, and did not bargain. Claire ran the math in a calm column. It would be a loss, but not a ruin. She said yes, because yes was the door that led out. The tow hook lifted the van one last time, and she watched it surrender to the road like a sentence being revised. When the check cleared, she paid the remaining balance on the loan and felt the ledger settle in her palm with a weight that was almost light. On Thursdays, she filed invoices for a landscaping company that smelled faintly of soil and gasoline. The owner liked orderliness and honest totals. He told her she could bring her lunch and sit in the shade of the equipment bay if the heat pressed too hard. She liked the rhythm of the work and the way the week returned to itself in predictable circles. She liked the sound of Luke doing homework at the kitchen table in the evening, his pencil making patient marks like footsteps down a long hallway. The court date arrived bright and fierce, as if the sun had been called to testify. The courthouse in town wore its white columns without arrogance. Inside, the air was cool and dry and carried the faint scent of paper and old varnish. Claire sat with her hands folded on a small leather folder. Her lawyer occupied the chair beside her with the posture of a person who knows what a day can hold and refuses to flinch. Ethan arrived wearing a suit that did not belong to his posture. He looked thinner, as if consequence had been taking its share. Madison was not with him. On the other side of the aisle, a row of faces practiced being neutral. A judge entered and sat, and a bailiff asked everyone to rise, and then to sit, and the ritual reset the room into something that resembled a scale. The hearing was not a show. It was a measured exchange of statements, exhibits, dates, and amounts. Claire's lawyer presented the contract, the late notices, the bank footage, the screenshots from the GPS application, the letter from Silver Ridge Logistics with its careful language about irregular communications. Ethan's lawyer spoke about confusion and intent, about the heat of a private separation, about a man who had believed in a quick solution that had proven false. The judge listened without commentary, his pencil tapping a slow cadence on a pad of paper. At intervals, he asked a question that made silence sound like attention. When it was time, Claire stood and took an oath that asked her to lift her right hand and say words she had heard in movies. She spoke them as if they had been written for her alone. She described the day of the emails, the bank, the hospital, the park. She did not say more than she knew. She did not say less. When she stepped down, she felt the floor earn her weight again. The judge returned after a short recess and read the ruling in a voice that had done this quietly for years. The court recognized the loss to Mrs. Bennett. The court ordered Ethan Bennett to pay $20,000 in damages within a schedule determined by the clerk. The court ordered $300 per month in child support to be deducted from wages once employment was verified or paid directly under penalty of sanction. The vehicle in dispute would remain sold. The loan would be recorded as satisfied. The parties would avoid contact outside of official channels. The room did not move, but it changed. Claire did not smile. She did not allow any expression that could be mistaken for victory. She felt the muscles around her eyes loosen by a fraction, as if a rope had come off a pulley and fallen to the floor. She nodded, once, to the clerk who would handle the practical math of enforcement. When Ethan glanced at her, quick and searching, she did not give him the old mirror. She held his gaze with respect for the years they had shared and then released it. Luke had taken a seat behind her after asking his homeroom teacher for permission to miss the science competition that fell on the same day. When she looked back, he smiled with the gravity of someone older. He leaned forward and whispered the sentence he had polished the night before. "I would rather be here," he said. The words lit a small lamp in her chest. She reached for his hand and held it for a moment, then let it go because he would need that hand for other days. The week after the ruling was not a parade, it was a list. Claire took the certified copy of the order to the clerk's window, filled out the payroll form for automatic deductions, and bought a small file box for the records that would document the payments as they arrived. She went to therapy and spoke about the difference between closure and completion. Closure, her therapist said, is the sealing of a door. Completion is the walking away without turning back. The first child support deposit came late and short. Claire felt a flare of old panic rise and then quiet as she breathed as she had been taught. She documented the amount, called the clerk, and sent a respectful email to Ethan's attorney, reminding them of the schedule. The second payment arrived on time. The third arrived early by a day, as if the world had developed a sense of humor. On a hot afternoon in July, the landscaping company owner added 2 more days to her schedule because orders had doubled and his bookkeeper had taken an extended leave. The extra hours did not solve everything, but they solved that week, which was what a week asks to have done. Luke mowed 2 small lawns on their block and saved the money in a jar with a label that read, Autumn Projects. He refused to explain what the projects were. He said the label was a promise to the future and a surprise to the present. There were setbacks that refused to dress as lessons. Claire's car required a new radiator. The expense arrived with the kind of timing that would have been comedy if it had not been true. They ate simpler meals for 2 weeks, and she accepted a ride from a colleague on days when the bus schedule did not flatter her commute. She did not say the word sacrifice to Luke. She said the word plan. At the end of the month, a letter arrived from Silver Ridge Logistics. It was brief and courteous. It confirmed that Ethan had taken a position at a subcontractor across the river and that his wages would accommodate the court's order. There was a sentence near the bottom that thanked Claire for her composure at the hearing. She read it twice and put the letter in the file box under a tab called Correspondence. She went to the window and stood for a moment with her palm on the glass, feeling the afternoon heat in the pane. She did not pray. She did not bargain. She only breathed. On a Saturday, they took the bus to the lake. Morning entered the bus through long windows and made brief gold wings on the metal poles. A child laughed somewhere near the front, and the driver returned the laugh with a friendly horn that startled a gull into flight. Claire and Luke sat side by side and watched Silver Ridge slide past, the bakery with its chalkboard promise, the thrift store that always displayed a pair of lamps that no one adopted, the narrow river that liked to pretend it was wider than it was. At the stop near the trail, they stepped down into light that seemed to have been saved specifically for this hour. The path to the water was soft with pine duff. The lake lay ahead like a quiet decision. They walked without speaking, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence can also be a story. By the shore, a line of stones found their arrangement. The water held the sky with an unblinking eye. Claire and Luke moved along the edge, passing 2 families with coolers and a man teaching a child to skim flat rocks. After a while, they stopped. A breeze lifted, touched their faces, decided to be a kindness, and then moved on. Life does not owe us fairness, Claire said. She kept her voice level, as if reading a line that had been waiting in a book she finally had the courage to open. But it gave us a second chance to be stronger. Luke looked at the water, then at her. Then let us not waste it, he said. They stood together and watched a small fishing boat make its patient way toward the far reeds. The sound of the motor was soft and respectful. A dragonfly stitched the air in neat strokes. Somewhere behind them a radio played a song about summer that did not know their names and did not need to. On the bus ride home, the sun sat low and generous. It poured through the glass and warmed the aisle. Claire rested her head against the window and let the vibration of the road hum along her bones. The light drew a bright band across Luke's notebook where he had written a list of supplies for school and, in a careful smaller column, a list of goals that did not require anyone else's permission. She watched him write and felt the quiet pride that does not shout because it knows it will still be there tomorrow. The bus turned down Maple Street, and the town opened itself to them as if it had been waiting with the patience of a good friend. The sun lifted its last gift and slid it through the window. In the bright reflection, Claire saw their faces beside each other, hers a little older than she expected, his a little older than the boy she had held in a hospital room 3 months ago. The light made a small halo around both profiles and then settled on their shoulders like a shawl they did not yet know they would need when the evening cooled. She closed her eyes and spoke the last truth she owed the day, the one that sat within her like a compass that had found north. Sometimes, the worst betrayals lead us to the best versions of ourselves, one broken day at a time. In the quiet that follows every storm, there is a moment when the world feels both fragile and new. The air is heavy with what has been lost, yet light with what has survived. For Claire, that moment did not arrive with a grand sunrise or a triumphant song. It came in the soft rhythm of ordinary mornings, the whistle of the kettle, the shuffle of her son's small feet, the way sunlight touched the edge of the window and turned it gold. She had learned that healing is not a single act of courage, but a slow and deliberate choosing, again and again, to face what hurt without letting it define her. The truth is, life will sometimes take from us what we thought we could not live without. It will test the edges of our strength, tear the paper-thin layers of trust, and leave us asking who we are when everything familiar has been rearranged. But in that unraveling lies a strange kind of grace, the chance to rebuild ourselves from the quiet center of what is true. Forgiveness may not always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it is simply the decision to stop carrying someone else's ruin inside your own chest. And love, the real kind, is not proven in words spoken in sunlight, but in the choices we make when no one is watching, to protect, to persist, to believe that gentleness is not weakness and that starting over is not failure. As Claire stood by the lake with Luke's hand in hers, she understood that peace is rarely perfect. It comes with scars, with debts still being repaid, with mornings that are harder than others. Yet, even the imperfect kind is worth everything, because it means you have made it through, and you are still here. Perhaps that is the lesson her story leaves for all of us, that resilience is quieter than revenge, that strength wears the face of patience, and that love, once broken, can be reborn in the simple act of living honestly again. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a wound, or a spark of courage, share what it means to you below. Tell me what return looks like in your own life. And if you believe that stories like Claire's remind us that we can rise even from the wreckage, stay with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and help these quiet stories find others who might need to hear them. Because somewhere, someone is standing in the aftermath of their own storm, waiting for a voice, a story, reminder that it is possible to begin again.